Pegasus is a figure from Greek mythology, their religion, Greek mythology. Pegasus was a horse that could fly. I wrote this story over Easter. Not this Easter, last Easter. And there's an awful lot of Christian references in it that you don't probably notice when you're first going through it. I don't mean for you to notice it, but afterwards I thought about it, that I'm a big fan of the Bible. I'm not at all religious, but I just love the Bible. I love to read it. It's great literature and an awful lot of moral content that I love, anyway. So I find that it comes out in my writing quite often, almost unconsciously, but then I work with that. And it triggers things in people, maybe not consciously, but perhaps subconsciously. I want you to look out for things like the Garden of Eden, the apple, Jesus going into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, and the crucifixion, the death and the shroud, the resurrection. See if you can spot it out. It's not in your face, but you may see it, and afterwards we'll chat about it. You ready? Got your seatbelts on? Pegasus by Tom Moore. When I was a boy in Avondale, my mother read me a story about a flying horse. His job was to pull the sun across the sky. And he talked to the sun and to the moon and the stars. That same summer, a real horse appeared in our meadow. He shook his shiny black coat, and his shoulder muscles rippled over sturdy bones. We cut and stowed the summer hay, and the horse gnawed on the aftergrowth. Soon I was climbing the fence to be with him. Father showed me how to give him an apple from an open hand so he wouldn't nip my fingers. He munched on the new grass while I ran around the meadow looking for birds' nests and other treasures. One day, I was running across the field with thin grey clouds flying overhead. My jacket was open and the wind whipped it around me. I grabbed the zipper on each side and raised the jacket up like a sail as the wind lifted me off my feet. When I regained my balance, I saw the horse looking at me. I ran up the little hill and took off again. Perhaps I flew. I landed easily this time and looked toward the horse. But his head was down, grazing, like he'd seen it all before. A boy flying across a garden. That same summer, my friends and I were walking up to Lee's Pond for a swim when someone shouted, "Look, here," and held up a long bone. Under a cairn of stones, we found more bones, white with age and light as feathers. There were ribs and shins and jawbones too big to be human. We drew them out from the rocks like magic swords. "Dinosaurs," Megan Redmond announced. We all agreed and proceeded home with our precious relics. But Father said, "Tom Cow buried an old horse up there years ago. Next time, take a different path to the pond." One day, Father put a bridle on the horse and a steel bit in his mouth. No saddle, just a wooden blanket. "Do you want to ride him?" he said. "I don't know how." "Give me your foot." He held the reins in his left hand and placed my foot on his knee. I put my hand on his shoulder and slithered across the horse's back. "Nip your knees tight and hold on to his mane," he said. The horse shook his skin under me. I pushed my hands down on his withers and felt the solid bone, long and white, under the warm flesh. He snorted and pulled up his head as Father walked us across the meadow. After a week, I could ride the horse alone. Father said, "Hold the reins tight and go slow. No gallops." But soon I was riding him at a trot, and once at a gorgeous, weightless gallop. Father borrowed a saddle so I could ride along the old railroad track up by Lee's Pond. The iron tracks were gone now, but there was a straight path where the train once ran. I would dig my ankles into his sides and he would explode and fly down that path faster than a train. But one day he turned his head and crossed the ditch into the thick trees. I pulled hard on the reins, but he kept going. I reached to smack the side of his head and he almost threw me. At last, I took one rein in both hands and pulled till his head turned and he was pushing sideways through the trees. At last, he stopped, stuck, panting. I was panting too, flying on adrenaline, arms, legs, face scratched by the spruce branches. Time stopped in the warm woods as the horse stood in the trees. A crow cawed. I pulled the reins back against his mouth and smacked him because we were not friends anymore. He looked behind at the trail of broken branches and flattened shrubs. Then he swung around and walked back to the railroad track. We emerged from the trees all sweat and drool, scratched and bleeding. We frightened two berry pickers, and the ride home was a somber affair. "What happened to you?" Father asked. "He took off into the trees, wouldn't stop. Crazy damn horse." I crawled off and walked away, not even looking back at him. Father put salve on the horse's legs, and Mother threw my ripped shirt into the garbage. In the bathroom, I stood on a chair, and she put hydrogen peroxide on my cuts. Father spoke through the closed door. "Is he all right?" "A bad cut on his bum," she said. "It's on my hip," I corrected her. "Is it deep?" "It'll heal." "How did you get a cut on your bum?" "The horse went sideways." I was almost crying. Sideways. The scratches on my narrow shoulders were red and raw. My ribs were rising and falling, but I didn't cry. Crazy horse ran into the trees. Later that night, Father explained. He saw a fox, or remembered something from his past. Remembered? Yes, horses have bad experiences just like people. He sat beside my bed. Crazy horse, my ribs heaved again. Father looked at the floor, searching for the right words. "Sometimes," he said, "you got to ride a horse the way he's pointed." This comment stumped me, and I shot back, "What do you know about horses?" He considered my insult for a moment and said, "We always had horses to plow and to haul wood. When Uncle Martin went over to the Boer War, they put him in the cavalry. Big deal. Uncle Martin said that a horse would tread between corpses." Father looked out my window into the night. Corpses. A shell would land on a campfire and bodies would lie around the shell hole. Horses would tread between the corpses, never touch one. Why not? They were afraid of slipping. If a horse broke his leg, you had to shoot him. Why would you shoot him? A horse's leg bone never mends. I thought about the cairn of stones and the long white bones. Father checked the cut on my hip. That'll leave a scar, he said. Then he checked my hands and arms. Your mother did a good job. He pulled a blanket over me and shut my door behind him. I closed my eyes. In the morning, I threw the sheet aside and rose from the bed. I looked in the mirror at my ugly scratches and stinging reds and blacks and blues. Soon, my wounds healed, and I looked again at the horse in the garden. One day, I offered him an apple from an open palm. Before long, I was back in the saddle, and we rode again across the meadow and down the old railroad track. But summer ended, and the horse had to go home. Father couldn't bring him in the truck, so the best way was for me to ride him. Father said, take the main road from Flynn's store till you get to the graveyard. Then go down the old Goat Shore Road. It will be safer. No cars. Okay. But Father had something else to say. I want you to hold the reins tight. Pull back against his mouth. The whole way? Yes, he said. Won't that hurt him? Father leaned in over the horse's neck. Listen to me, he said. This horse weighs 1,000 pounds. You weigh 80 pounds. You don't want him thinking about that. Let him know you're in charge. He'll be frightened. And he needs to know someone is in charge. Okay, I said. But Father was still thinking, deciding if he would let me ride a horse 2 miles in traffic. Keep on the gravel shoulder when you can. The pavement is slippery for his shoes. Once you get to the graveyard, you'll be fine. So, we started our journey down the station road on the gravel shoulder. A car horn blew, and my horse stiffened. I patted his shoulder like Father did in the meadow. Another car passed and someone shouted my name. But the horse just swung his head and walked on towards the graveyard. When we passed Flynn's store, people came to the window to see a boy on a horse. Others smiled and stood back so we could pass, like a memory of old times. The blue Atlantic was on our left and the flaming hills of autumn on our right. Spruce and balsam waved in the wind. Maple and birch threw their crimson leaves at our feet. Soon, the graveyard beckoned us down the Goat Shore Road. I pulled the reins hard to the left, and the horse crossed with the clickety-clack of iron on asphalt. The little gravel road ran down to the ocean, with the graveyard on our right. Uncle Tom and Aunt Kitty lay, awaiting our arrival, berths ready for that last long voyage. But not today. Grass grew between the wheel tracks from men and horses long ago. The trees fell away to a rocky beach on our left and high hills on our right. The sea air struck us, and the horse snapped back his head and whinnied. A half a mile of straight road, no asphalt, no trees, no cars lay before us. I patted his neck and loosened the reins, in spite of Father's orders. The horse shook his head and whinnied again. I dug my ankles into his sides, flicked the reins down hard on his neck and shouted, "Giddy up!" His first leap surprised me, but I held on, and soon he hit his stride. All four hooves lifted, touched the earth for a moment, then into the air again, and again, and again, in a rhythmic stretch of horse, earth, wind, and water. The long, slow motion stride, effortless, magic. We were flying. We were beyond the graveyard, beyond the church, beyond the earth, the sea, and the tide. This was our time to ride just as fast as we dared along the beach and up, up into the sky. No wings melted that day as we talked to the sun, the moon, and the stars down that graveyard road long, long ago. The end.